Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to discuss the full moon or Purnima that's happening on October 6, 2025. This talk is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective, so ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. And it seems like the theme for this moment is creative breakthrough. So let's take a look. Note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only. So, this should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. Then you might take a minute or two to read the rest of this disclaimer. Just some announcements and orientation, especially if you're new to the channel. I guess the big announcement is I'm offering a level 1 Jyotish Vedic astrology course this January 2026. Applications are available now. The application deadline for submission of the application is November 14th. If you'd like an application for the course, email heartlightask@yahoo.com. And I also posted a little video on it if you want to watch that, and learn some more about the class. Also, auto dubbing is available on this channel, and now YouTube has expanded the number of languages that is offered as auto dubbing. So now Dutch, Polish, and Korean are added to the list that you see here. Also, all of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology and my concepts playlist, they can be found there. Wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more. Also, my channel, is all about playlists. I'm good about organizing my videos into different playlists so that they're easy to find. So like this type of moon phase video on the full moon Purnima is in my Gochar transits list. But I have other ones like Bhava's houses, yogas, planetary combinations, and that sort of thing. Also, if you'd like to learn astrology by looking at the birth charts of famous people, places, and moments in time, I have a video titled Birth Chart Archive List 2025, where I list all the famous charts I've analyzed on the channel and the videos you can find them in. Some of the last few videos I posted, in case you missed any: Pisces constellation or Meena rashi, the solar eclipse or Surya Grahan that happened on 21st September, which includes the birth chart for New Zealand. Also the Gauri Yoga or Shining combination, and then the planetary transits or Gochara for October 2025. So if you're new to all this and want to start learning Vedic astrology or get more out of talks like this, these videos I've listed at the bottom of the slide are the videos I would start with to really get a solid foundation so you could start learning Vedic astrology. Alrighty. All right, so here is a view of the chart for this moment in time of the full moon Purnima that's happening October 6th, 2025. It's set for 23:47 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, which is New York time. Okay, so I just want to give everybody a chance to look at the chart without all the markings and notes I usually add because you can barely see the chart. And also, if you're a student, you can kind of pause here, do your own analysis, and then check in, with my analysis later on and double check your work or whatever. Alrighty. So let's start looking into it, though. So the Lugna, let's start at the top here. If you're not familiar, this is a North Indian style chart, and that's what I use in my work. So in North Indian charts, the top diamond in the middle is what we call the ascendant, the rising sign, the first house. In Sanskrit, it's called the Lugna. Okay, so you're going to be hearing Lugna over and over and over again. So the first house is important because it represents the general kind of gestalt of somebody, their physicality, their personality, that sort of thing. And it sets a tone for the rest of the chart. It kind of orients the chart. Okay, to get to the other houses, what you do is you count inclusively from the first house, and you count up into the back or counterclockwise. So the second house is that upside down triangle in the top left corner with the little 4 in the bottom. Okay, so the Lugna has a little 3 in the bottom corner. The 3 represents the third constellation of the zodiac, which is Gemini or Mithuna in Sanskrit. So what this means is we have a Gemini rising chart. Okay, so Gemini, if you're not familiar, is a dual air sign. So air signs are related to thinking, thoughts, and dual means that it can literally go both ways. So we have a lot of Gemini rising people tend to be very thoughtful, for better or worse. Like sometimes so many thoughts they can't control them. Okay, because again, it's a wind sign or air sign, so you can't. It's hard to control the wind and air. You can kind of direct it a little bit, but it's hard to contained completely. Okay, so we've got a lot of thoughts going on here, maybe even dual or contrasting thoughts. And then the Lugna nakshatra. So a nakshatra is a lunar mansion. There are 27, more or less, 27 lunar mansions. Every night the moon passes through a different one. They all have different energies and deities associated with them. So Punarvasu here, the symbol of that is a quiver of arrows. Okay, so that little box, like if you see archers in movies, is usually where I see archers. That box that they hang on their back and they have their arrows ready to string on their bow and shoot them off, and then they sometimes go to retrieve the arrows and put them back in the quiver. That's the energy of Punarvasu. So there's a lot of cycling going on. So since we have Punarvasu, okay, at the top, and this is a dual air sign, this means there's a lot of mental churning going on. Okay. Luckily, though, we have Jupiter in the top here in Gemini. Okay. Jupiter is a planet that represents balance, justice, charity, compassion, fairness, that sort of thing. And Jupiter is also in Punarvasu. Okay. Jupiter, because it's in the top of the chart, it has what we call Digbala directional strength. So Jupiter is quite strong. The other thing is that Jupiter, the star associated or ruling Punarvasu, this nakshatra lunar mansion, is the star Jupiter. So in a way, Jupiter is what we would call Swa, or in its own. Usually we refer to Swa as a planet that's in its own sign. It's not in its own sign, but it's in its own star. So it's Swa by its star or Tara. Okay, so very strong Jupiter at the top. So again, this churning that's going on, Jupiter also represents like wisdom and spirituality. So there's a lot of churning, mental churning going on, but I would consider this to be like probably very wise consideration going on here, or even maybe like a spiritualization of the thought process. Okay. So, what are the first things besides the lugna? I always look at that first, but besides that, like when I'm just sort of like gazing at a chart, each one kind of directs my energy, my gaze, and my mind in different ways. So when I look at this one, there are a couple of things I notice first. One, I noticed the Ketu and Venus in the third house. And then I also noticed the moon and the Saturn in the 10th house here. Okay. So why did I notice those two? Well, Venus just crossed Ketu. Ketu is the south node of the moon, and it has its unexpected, hidden, can be violent separatist type energy. On the plus side, when Ketu's in more like involved or conjoined with benefics like it is with Venus, you can get this like kind of more like spiritual kind of surrender release type energy. Okay. Venus, which just crossed K2, represents things like relationships, especially like spouse or that sort of thing, but the finer things of life, travel, pets, social grace, compassion, also the worldly advisor. Okay. And the arts, creativity. And the third house here is related to classical arts. Okay. So since Venus just crossed K2, I would assume there was, some kind of shift related to the things that Venus represents, as well as potentially like a, practical assessment or advisement about some sort of potentially spiritual practice. Okay, because the third house is not just classical arts, but it represents things like physical expression or physical communication or nonverbal communication, which is usually means like actions. Okay, how are you expressing yourself in actions? But this could be related to like unusual art or something like that. But since Venus crossed K2, I would assume that there was some big shift related to the arts. Okay, especially if this was a person's chart. Okay, so we can read this chart either statically as if it was one person, or we can read it dynamically again as if it's like a transit chart. So I go back and forth with these things. Okay, the other thing the third house represents is neighbors and siblings. So it could be that like a neighbor or sibling recently had a change in terms of their art or creativity or relationships, or the other thing is there could be some sort of unusual advice related to siblings and neighbors going on here. Okay. This could also be like maybe the release or ending of like some kind of worldly advisor. Could also be, the end of some kind of a relationship, um, or at least maybe just a change. These are in pretty good nakshatras, actually. Ketu is in a nakshatra called Purva Phalguni, which is related to the symbol of a hammock or marital bed. There's a lot of creativity associated with it. And also the star of Ketu is Venus. So Ketu is very much like dominated, we would say, by Venus. So that's nice. It kind of keeps, because Ketu is a natural malefic planet. And when, again, natural malefic is in a generally more positive type of nakshatra with benefics, you'll get more of the benefic energy, benefic kind of results of what K2 can offer, even though it's a natural malefic planet. Okay. So there might be changes here related to those sorts of things. Now, if we look at Moon and Saturn, well, that's already like a big, exclamation point in the chart, because when Saturn is with the Moon or before after the Moon, and in houses before after the Moon, then that gives what's called a sadhisati. Okay. Sadhisati is a 7.5 year period. The reason why is Saturn takes about 2.5 years to go through a sign. So when Saturn's going through the sign before, of, or after the Moon, that's 3 times 2.5, and that's 7.5 years. Okay. A lot of people are scared of sadhisati. It's not always a bad thing. Actually, the last sadhisati I went through is when I started learning Jyotish. Yeah, that was pretty positive for me. But it's not always so positive, and it wasn't. There was that positive thing that happened, but also a lot of negativity. Like my father passed away, and then also the pandemic happened, and that sort of thing. So, it was a mixed bag, let's say, at least for me. But one of the major common things that happens with sadhisati is a long-term major support system is often lost. Okay. So we've got that going on. Sadhisati. The other thing is the Moon represents the mind, especially the emotional mind, intuitive mind. And when you have Saturn with Moon like this, you often get this, because Saturn represents obstacles, delays, skepticism, doubt, fear, depression. Saturn's like kind of a party pooper, frankly. Okay. Saturn's quite strong because it's retrograde. That line under Saturn means it's retrograde. So you have this pretty strong Saturn with this Moon. Okay. Now, the nakshatras of Moon and Saturn, Moon is in a pretty nice nakshatra, a pretty gentle nakshatra called Revati, which is related to hospitality and also traveling. And Moon also represents hospitality and nurturance, which is very nice. But you have Saturn here, so there's delays here. And Saturn also represents history, tradition, and structure. The other thing is Saturn, just literally in the last couple of days, shifted into a nakshatra, retrograded into the nakshatra of Purva Bhadrapada. Purva Bhadrapada is a pretty gnarly, nakshatra. It's the symbol of it is the front 2 legs of a funeral pyre. So smoke, flames, destruction, things burning to ash, okay? And Saturn represents things like chronic disease, obstacles, and death. Okay, so there's clearly some big transformation that's going on here. Okay, probably related to the mind, but also potentially related to the parents. Okay, because Saturn is with Moon, which also represents mom, and it's aspecting, Sun, which represents father. Okay, so with Saturn and Moon together, we get complicated, if not troubling emotions. And with Venus and Ketu, also, we get troubling emotions, okay? Because Moon and Venus are the 2 emotional planets. And Ketu and Saturn are kind of often very separatist type planets. Okay, they can cause a lot of change and endings and delays. And strange things like all of a sudden, life takes a relationship or creative endeavor takes a left turn type thing. Okay? So, because Moon just crossed Saturn and Venus just crossed K2, again, if this is a person's chart or generally like a Gemini rising person, probably just went through some emotional releases, changes, and struggles, frankly. Okay, probably. But they're starting to come out of it, and they're starting to see maybe even a silver lining in some of the challenges that they've been through, recent challenges they've been through. Okay. The other thing I would notice in this chart, Let me just check my notes here. Oh, one more thing about Venus Ketu, since I was talking about that. This Purva Phalguni and Venus is an Uttara Phalguni, so they're both symbolized by a hammock or marital bed. So again, relaxation, enjoyment, finer things of life. But the difference between Purva Phalguni, the main difference between Purva Phalguni and Uttara Phalguni, the Uttara Phalguni is the nakshatra Venus is in, is that there's this sense of enjoyment, but with a purpose. So this could be potentially somebody who is like doing something, some kind of artistic endeavor, that was fun and they enjoyed or whatever. But maybe especially after Venus crossed Ketu in the last few days, the last week or so, now there's more of like a sense of purpose involved with it. And maybe even like a spiritual purpose involved with it. Okay. So I would say with the Venus Ketu, you could even think of like gentle purpose in terms of like nonverbal expression. Okay. So the other thing coming up here is, let's see, the other thing that I notice is this Mercury and Mars circles in the 5th house here. So Mercury recently this week crossed over into Libra where Mars is sitting. It's been there for a little bit. But, Mercury's second fastest planet. So very soon, in about a week or two, I think about 10 days, Mercury and Mercury's going to cross Mars. They're going to be in the same degree, and that's going to cause a planetary war, or a graha yuddha, that we'd say in Sanskrit. Okay. So when those two planets get into planetary war, that means that their symbols are fighting against each other. They are stabilized, planets are destabilized, and the houses that they own are destabilized as well. Okay, and so Mercury, this is important because Mercury is a ruling planet for Gemini rising, because Mercury rules Gemini. So that means that there's going to be some shift or change with a person's identity. Okay. And then Mercury also represents the mind like Moon, but Moon is more emotional. Mercury's more logic, analytical, that sort of thing. Mercury also represents education, communication, decisions, speech. Okay. So these sorts of things can be, up for change. Okay. And Mercury is in a nakshatra called Chitra. Chitra is symbolized by a gemstone. So that's all about structure, but also value, precious, like precious jewels. So there's some, really precious indications of Mercury that are heading for a change here, including the self-identity, both physically and psychologically. Mars is here. Mars is an innovative planet, leadership planet. Roll your sleeves up and get in the middle of things, and action-oriented planet. Also courage, and it's more impulsive. It's more again of the body, whereas Mercury is more of the mind. So when you get Mercury and Mars up against each other in planetary war, you get like logic versus action. Potentially. Mars is in a different nakshatra than Mercury. It's in a nakshatra called Swati. Swati is symbolized by new grown grass blowing in the wind, which often I've mentioned when I see people with pretty strong placements in Swati. They seem to have a very kind of nervous, almost like, like grass shaking or leaves shaking in the wind. And that's, sometimes very obvious with people with Swati placements. So, but the thing about Swati is that, again, there's some burgeoning, emerging, not quite fully developed or established situation. So we're talking about potentially some new leadership here that's not fully established or solidified. And so these are the two things that are kind of going up against each other. Okay. The other thing that's going on in this chart pretty soon is that you can see Venus is almost in a few days is going to cross the line from Leo in the 3rd house, where it is in this chart, to Virgo in the 4th house. And so what happens is when Venus goes into Virgo, Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And Mercury, so Venus is going to be in a sign of Mercury. Mercury is in Libra, which is ruled by Venus. So you're going to have a parivartana, or exchange of houses between Venus and Mercury, which is going to strengthen both of those houses. That also means that Mercury and Venus are going to be all over this chart. And Mercury and Venus, when you have those together, you could get like writing arts, beautifying thoughts, creative business, these sorts of things when you start like thinking about the different, permutations of Venus and Mercury together. Okay, so potentially a lot of creativity, also business and thoughts, and ideas and that sort of thing. Um, the other thing that's happening pretty soon is that you can see Jupiter is also pretty close. It's in 28 degrees 57 minutes of Gemini. Pretty soon, by the end of the month of October, that is crossing into Cancer. Okay. So once Jupiter crosses into Cancer, it's actually going to be aspecting this Saturn and Moon that's in the 10th house of work, 9 to 5 work, and reputation. And Jupiter in Cancer is exalted. So you're going to have still a very strong, Jupiter's going to be exalted by a sign or constellation because it's in Cancer. And Jupiter is going to be in Punarvasu the whole time. So it's going to be in its own star. This is a very strong Jupiter. Jupiter represents oral communication. And so the second house also represents oral communication. So there may be a lot of speech going on for, again, this person or Gemini rising. But this super strong Jupiter is going to be aspecting the 12th house, which it also owns because it's Pisces, and Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. So that's going to very much spiritualize and buffer the changes that are going on here with Moon and Saturn, especially because Saturn's going to retrograde through Purva Bhadrapada for a while. So Saturn is going to be on this funeral pyre energy for a while. But luckily, Jupiter, at least for the time that Jupiter is going to be in Cancer, is going to help, take the edge off of this transformation that Saturn's going through. The other thing is that, again, in a few days, once Venus goes into Virgo, Venus is going to be aspecting into Pisces where it's exalted. So you have Jupiter aspecting its own sign of Pisces, and you're going to have Venus aspecting Pisces where it's exalted. These are the two great benefics of like compassion, charity, diplomacy, advisement. Venus is again the worldly advisor. Jupiter is the spiritual advisor. So, especially again, if this is a person or Gemini risings, I would expect that there's going to be some big boost in terms of work and reputation, especially as an advisor, coming up, in the next week to the 2-3 weeks, probably through the end of the month. Because I think this Venus Jupiter aspecting Pisces, I think that's going to last. I forgot the dates, but I think it's like 2.5, 3 weeks. So, but the other thing that's I wrote it down here. What did I write? Oh, October 18th through November 2nd. So what is that? That's about 2 weeks, right? 4 to 12, 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, you're going to have Jupiter aspecting its own sign and Venus aspecting its exaltation sign in the 10th house for Geminis. So that 2 weeks, it's going to be all of a sudden, boom, like things are going to really take off. There's going to be some big boost, despite the Saturn that's been there, because Saturn in retrograde is also aspecting the 7th house here. So Saturn's really probably been slowing work down for Gemini, and also independent business because Saturn's aspecting the 7th house. So whether it's 9 to 5 work or independent business, probably work has really been slowing down for Gemini. But again, there's going to be some big boost, and this boost actually is going to be very similar to probably what Gemini's experienced back in April of this year. Because what happened was Saturn shifted from Aquarius to Pisces at the end of March, right after we had 2 eclipses. And at that time, Venus was in Pisces, and Jupiter was in Taurus. And so you had an exchange of houses between Venus and Jupiter. So basically, you had Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn in the 10th house of Pisces for Gemini for about 6 weeks, because Jupiter shifted mid-May, and then Venus, and then that broke the parivartana, and then Venus was there until the end of May. So there was probably most Geminis experienced some sort of boost related to work and reputation at that time, and so they could probably expect something similar along those lines. Besides the fact that Venus and Jupiter are the 2 counselors again, it's probably going to be related to counseling of some type. The other thing is, again, you have Venus parivartaning into the fifth house of counseling, and Jupiter aspecting the fifth house of counseling. And Venus is going to be in its own sign through parivartana while it's traveling through Virgo, but then Venus is going to be in its own sign after that for a while. So it looks like, a lot of Geminis will probably be kind of stepping up into advisory roles or getting a bump up. Maybe they're already an advisor, at least, and then they might be, bumped up a level or something like that, or get some big work contract or something like that. So yeah, so that's just like a general overview of this chart at this time. Okay, so what else do we see here? So basically, okay, so now here are more of my notes. Okay, so now, this is going to get into more nitty-gritty detail here. But essentially, all the stuff on the left is basically the same chart we were looking at, but instead of three circles, I've got the lines with all the aspects and stuff. Okay, so again, the Lagna nakshatra, Punarvasu, cycling, the Sun nakshatra, let's talk about that. So that's in Hasta. Hasta is symbolized by a hand. So Sun represents career or leadership, and then Hasta, like that can literally mean like getting control. So since Sun is aspecting, especially the 10th house of work, this might again being like getting a hand up, or helping hand related to work and reputation. The day lord, oh, sorry, wait, the moon is Revati. Okay, so we talked about Revati. Moon and Revati, especially with this pretty gnarly Saturn in Purva Bhadrapada, that's going to help take the edge off of Saturn. Not entirely, but there will be like some sort of like grace, mental ending type energy with that. The day lord of this chart is Moon. So again, mind and emotion, public potentially as well. The Hora lord or hour lord is Jupiter, which we've been talking about. So again, balancing news, advisement. The dasha period for this chart, which is a planetary period. So what that means is the planets that are listed here are kind of more active or influential at the time. We have Mercury, Venus, and Moon and Saturn. So that's also like, again, that's where my eye naturally went because Venus just crossed K2, and then it's going to go into parivartana with Mercury very soon, and then we've got Moon with Saturn. So again, when I see, especially Mercury and Moon, those are the two mind planets. Venus and Moon, the two emotional planets, and Saturn is like difficulties. So it's like kind of like uplifting thoughts and feelings, despite loss or through loss or that sort of thing, which again could be like a counselor. Like, how do you pull yourself up when things don't go, the best way or the way you hoped, right? And the dasha period is shifting to Mercury, Venus, Mars. So we're dropping off the Moon and Saturn and we're shifting to Mars. So we're shifting into beautifying the thoughts, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, action. So we're going from like feeling kind of mopey and, challenged and maybe down and out or frustrated to let's get moving. Let's move into action here. Okay. And that the stop period shift is going to happen November 12th, 2025. So what is that, about a month? A little bit less than a month. And then again, this Mars is in the fifth house of counseling and creativity. So innovative counsel, besides that Mars is an innovative planet, rebellious planet, that sort of thing. Okay, so some context, social context for this moment in time. So on the 6th of October for this full moon, it's actually called the Sharad Purnima. Okay, now this is considered to be a fairly important full moon throughout the year. The reason why is that the moon phases, there are 15 tithis of each side of the moon phase. So from new moon to full moon and full moon to new moon. Okay, there's 15 tithis on each direction. So I guess you can think of it as 30. So each tithi, each phase of the moon, is related to what they call a kala. A kala is a divine quality. And the Sharad Purnima is actually the Purnima of the year where the moon demonstrates all 16 kalas or energies, divine qualities simultaneously. So there's like this completion and, really special luminous energy coming from the moon. Okay. The other thing is like there are different rituals are related to it, but one of them is to make kheer. Kheer is basically like a rice pudding, like you boil milk and with some rice and usually some sweetener, sometimes like cardamom or something like that, and you leave it to soak, in like a window overnight, so they can gather the energy of the moon. So this is a very like moon-based, sweet or dessert treat, whatever you wanted to call it. It's also a very nourishing type of food because you have usually like white basmati rice milk and a little bit of sweetener and then some very soft but nourishing herbs. Actually, kheer could be considered a rasayana, like that's what they talk about in Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine. But kheer itself is a very symbolically moon type dessert or food because you've got the milk. So milk is very much like that's like the planet you would think of with milk or any kind of liquid. And then you have, and it's also white, so that's also moon based. And then white basmati rice, that's also moon, and sweet and nourishing. And it's also like some people eat it cold, some people eat it warm. So again, it's a very nourishing type of food. Like when people are sick, they usually either do soups, you know, um, like a lentil dal, rice type combination, and or when they're recovering, they'll do like kheer because it's so nourishing and generally easy for the body to soak up the nutrients of, especially the milk and the rice and all that. It's a fairly easy digestive food for most people, not everybody, but especially because it's cooked, it breaks down the milk, so it's easier to digest. Um, so yeah, so moonlight kheer is like one way that people honor the moon. There's even like chants of like 108 different names for the moon and that sort of thing. So there's all this kind of stuff going on. So the reason why the right side is empty for a second here is because I was putting my notes together for this talk, and then I'm reading this about Shard Purnima because I wasn't thinking about it at all. And guess what I actually was doing last week? Actually, this week, not even a week ago, a few days ago, I'm like, cleaning my house and everything, which makes sense because Mercury's in Virgo. So you get a lot of like, Marie Kondo decluttering type energy when Mercury goes through Virgo. So I was doing some of that and I found these. So check out the next slide. These here on the slide are actually watercolor paintings that I did a while ago, and I don't actually remember when, probably a few years ago. And I sort of forgot about them. Um, but what these are these are actually yantras. So these are geometric symbols of the. I don't have them all here, but some of the nityas. The nityas are the deities, goddesses of each tithi, the moon phases. So there are 15 tithis and 16 nityas. There's an extra one that's kind of like related to the unseen divine energy aura, you could say. But you can see here, like at the top is like Tithi 2, Bhaga Malini, and then 3 is Nitya Klina, and then the third one here is Vanivashini, yeah, and then Mahavajreshwari, and then Shiva Duty. So anyway, it kind of blew me away that like I was just I had no intention of including this in the talk today, but that's what I was doing. And then I was, as I'm putting the talk together, reading about Sharad Purnima and the tithis and, honoring them and stuff like that. And I was just like, wow, like, what's the chance? Sometimes you think you're just doing some kind of mundane, like just cleaning out some shelves and stuff like that. And then you realize, like, actually, there's divine essence and direction flowing through us at all times. It was almost like somehow I was being prepared for Monday, Shard Purnima. So anyway, I thought some of you would appreciate, that, actually the occurrence that happened in my life this week. So anyway, now back to our regularly scheduled program. But yeah, they're really cool. Actually, it's kind of like adult coloring books and stuff like that. When you get you draw the yantras and you fill them in. But it's also a spiritual practice. It's a type of meditation and, again, a type of active reverence, almost like the Venus and K2 in the third house. This would be like an unusual art that's like more of a non-verbal, more of a physical type of, artistic endeavor, that sort of thing. So anyway, there you go. Okay, now back to our regular schedule program. So all the stuff on the left is the same as the slide before. So on the right, there are my notes for the other houses. So the Lagna, just to finish that off. So again, Gemini, Mithuna, dual air sign, Tosva Baba Vayu, and we have Digbala, Swad, Jupiter, and Punarvasu. So again, spiritual balance consideration. Now this could also be that this Jupiter is kind of coming in to heal, some of this emotional disturbance that's clear in the chart with the Venus K2, Venus just crossing K2, and then Moon just crossing Saturn. And then we've got the Mercury and Mars, heading towards planetary war. So the three mind emotion planets are, tossing about. And Jupiter, it seems like, is going to help, rebalance that, create a new balance. The Lagnatia is the ruling planet for the chart. That's that Mercury in Chitra. It's gone to the fifth house, which is a Dharma stana. So part of this reconsideration, spiritual wise reconsideration that's going on here is related to duty. Like maybe stepping away from, I don't want to say frivolous, but like, enjoyable activities that maybe seem a little bit empty, like they're fun, but then it's sort of like, when it's over, and there's no kind of lasting joy, or maybe there's no real deep essential beingness, that's kind of felt through those activities. Okay, so again, this Mercury, Lagnatia is in a house of duty, fifth house with Mars and Swati. So again, this kind of fledgling, leadership energy, but it's aspected by Jupiter. So this Jupiter is also the teacher. This could be like teaching or leading groups. The reason why I'm saying groups is Mars is the lord of the 11th house, which is clubs, group, society. So it looks like there's some new initiatives going on related to clubs, group, society. The other thing is that Mars is a courageous planet, and the 11th house is related to gambling. So it looks like somebody's at least willing to take some kind of risk here related to groups, like maybe putting themselves out there, to lead or teach something. And what are they going to be teaching? Well, something related to spirituality and the self, because Mercury is there. But also possibly like some sort of spiritual transformation related to like a spiritual or even father's lineage because of the sun in this fourth house here. It could also be something like yoga, because Mercury is like the peripheral nerves, and Mars, when you get Mercury and Mars together, you can get like sports and like, like mind body type stuff going on. But this could also potentially be law. But again, I'm seeing this more as like a spiritual law or spiritual actions happening here. This could also be in the fifth house here, like fifth house is also like yantra, tantra, mantra, and especially with Mercury here and Chitra with Mars and Jupiter, this could be education, but also communication. So like chanting mantras, that sort of thing. Or yantras, like the ones I just showed you, the watercolors that I've done in the past. It still blows me away. I actually just, when I saw Sharad Purnima, I was like, wow. I just kind of sat there for a few minutes like, wow, I just pulled these yantras out like 2 days ago. Unknowing, or, maybe subconsciously, I mean, consciously I didn't know what was going on, but subconsciously, or just divine hand was leading me in that direction, probably. So, yeah, so again, there's going to be a bit of a tussle here, with this planetary war that's coming up. Again, it can be conflict between, because it seems like, again, there's been some sort of emotional challenge. And now it's like, how do we do things differently? How do we support ourselves, spiritually and in practical ways to reconceptualize and shift our perspectives so that we can, pull ourselves up and use these, challenges as maybe even like, new building blocks for a new life or a new direction, that sort of thing. So, yeah, what else do we have here? Yeah, conflicts. And then the Venus, Mercury and Venus are going to be in parivartana. So, the fourth house is going to be stronger because Mercury, you can see Mercury there. And that's also going to help Venus because Venus is debilitated in Virgo, but with Mercury there, it's going to be Bunga. So you're going to decrease the amounts, sort of effects of the debilitation of Venus. So that'll bring Venus up. And then Venus is going to be super strong because it's going to be in its own house through parivartana in the fifth house, which is, again, counseling, and also children, that sort of thing. So that um, this kind of upgrade in counseling and creativity that's going on here in this chart, because especially once we get Venus crossing in a few days into Virgo in the fourth house, that means this chart's also going to have a Saraswati yoga. Saraswati yoga is related to education, as the fourth house is, and it's also related to creativity. So, and once Venus crosses into Virgo there, it's going to be debilitated, but it's going to have Digbala directional strength. So it's going to be an exaggerated Venus, besides the parivartana exchange of houses that it's in with Mercury. So yeah, so again, it looks like, there's been some challenges here for Gemini risings, but there's going to be a big boost for the last, especially 2 weeks of October here coming up. What other parivartanas, since we're on the parivartana? Yeah, the yogas, parivartana yoga, saraswati yoga. There's also Kesari yoga in this chart, so that's the relative position of Jupiter and Moon. That's going to be networking, and so especially since Moon is in a traveling nakshatra of Revati, and Jupiter is in a traveling, nakshatra. This could be like, networking, especially like pretty far and wide, related to self and, again, work, reputation. And then we have solar yogas here, a bunch of them. So we have, a lot of influences on the sun here because we have flanking the sun. We have a natural benefic on both sides. We also have a natural malefic on both sides. So that means that the sun is going to have a lot of, twists and turns and ups and downs depending on which planets are active. But luckily, since we're running Mercury Venus, and Mercury Venus are the two natural malefics surrounding the sun, that's also going to give a boost to career and purpose, because those are things and health, because those are general health, because those are things that the sun represents. Okay, so yes, so these different yogas, they're going to give strength, creativity, education, networking, leadership, essentially. Then we have chidra grahas. These are plants of vulnerability. These are like sensitive spots for somebody in their life, in their chart. So we have Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, Saturn. So Sun, again, this could be father, authority, general health, purpose, career. Jupiter and Mercury, those are the two education planets, two communication planets, news, and then Saturn here, so tradition, right, and history. So things like leadership, authority, father, structure, communication, education. Jupiter's children, friends, employees, because friends is Mercury, employees is Saturn. So there can be, it looks like, some relationship issues here, and problems potentially with the different types of authority. Communication, maybe education, and structure with these things. So then we have the yogi, aviyogi, duplicate yogi. These are plants representing wealth or lack of wealth. So K2 is yogi. So that's a planet representing wealth. So this kind of unusual twist to arts is potentially something that's going to help somebody make money. And then the duplicate yogi is Jupiter. So also K2 and Jupiter, can be seen as, kind of, they're all spiritual planets, but especially K2 and Jupiter, like they specifically represent Jupiter. They're all the planets are spiritual because this is all based on karma, positive and negative karma. That's essentially what we're reading when we're reading a horoscope. We often call it a, karma scope, The Aviyogi here is Rahu. So Rahu is in the 11th house. Rahu is the north node of the moon, also symbolizing unusual, energy, but Rahu is more of an ambitious type of driving forward type planet. Rahu is also in Purva Bhadrapada, that nakshatra of cremation, fire, burning energy. And so that also means that since Rahu's in the ninth house, this could be enterprise, this could be authority, this could be father, this could be like house of religion and spirituality. So again, there's big shifts and changes related to, it looks like, parents, also religion, spirituality, also enterprise. There's a lot going on here. And it looks like it's been kind of, sagging, lagging, for Geminis for a while here because of Saturn and Rahu. But again, in the next few days, it's looking like there's going to be a pretty big boost and breakthrough with especially relative positions of Jupiter and Venus, and then the parivartana with Venus and Mercury. So that means that the natural benefics are going to be well placed and supporting each other even more. Yeah, rather than it's sort of Saturn and Rahu sort of, you know, putting a damper on everything. It's like these three, Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury, are really going to give a boost to the charts, Gemini rising charts. So with this K2 Rahu Jupiter situation with wealth or lack of wealth, it looks like gains are there to be had related to unusual types of like unconventional, like releasing things and spiritual. Like, because K2 is a very like, like with Rahu being the Aviyogi, Rahu's a very ambitious planet. Like I always think of New York City when I think of Rahu, because like New York City's all about big dreams. If you want like the small house and the dog with the two kids and the white picket fence, that's not really a New York dream. New York dreams are all about like, I want to be the best. I want to be best in the world. I want to be on Broadway. I want to have a sky. I want to build skyscraper. A skyscraper. It's not enough to have like a tiny house. That's not, I mean, they are all tiny houses, but they're all worth like a lot of money because real estate's so like precious in New York, but in New York City. But that's the thing, is it's this, and Rahu can kind of indicate like, this almost like obsessive drive towards things. So some sort of obsessive drive here is actually going to, um, you know, actually detract from wealth in like this person's life or at this moment. Whereas releasing things, letting things flow, like letting the light come in with these natural benefics, and like letting spirit essentially take over, that's what's going to help, when it's related to money and finances and economics. So then the second house here, the second house lord is this full moon and Revati. So again, the second house is related to family, inner circle, speech, assets. So I would say that since moon is in Revati, even though it's with this gnarly Saturn, Purva Bhadrapada, I would say the moon is still about like grace, in or through loss of hospitality, nurturance, travel, speech, family assets. This is like trying to make the most of like a tough situation, essentially. Okay. Um, and then the third house here, third house lord again. Why do I have sun and Hasta? I got to change that. So it's Venus and Uttara, Phalguni, and Ketu. And the lord is sun. Okay, that's why I have it. So the third house lord is sun. It's in Hasta. So again, that taking control of career, purpose type energy. Venus and Uttara, Phalguni, Ketu's in Purva Phalguni. Again, the hammock, enjoyment. But the Venus with the Uttara Phalguni having purpose as well as enjoyment. So this is going to be high level though, because the sun or Leo represents like a high level, type of art, or leadership or, yeah, that kind of thing. So, but some sort of unusual creativity, maybe even technical, because that can be K2, or digital, maybe digital arts. That's involving enjoyment with purpose, both. Possibly advising as well, again with siblings, neighbors, and maybe change in relationships or even loss potentially. Although I'm seeing more change rather than loss, because again, K2 and Venus are in pretty nice nakshatras here. I mean, they're not like in Purva Bhadrapada, like Saturn. um, the other thing is that Ketu, especially Ketu in Purva Phalguni, because it's aspecting the ninth house, that can indicate, like, again, like a spiritual kind of release of things. Like, who has it in their chart? Oh, Pope Leo. He has, if I remember correctly, Sun and Ketu in Leo, and that's his sun rising chart. So, so it might seem kind of strange that a pope has these, hammock marital beds energies in his lugna, his rising sign. But the thing is, when you have um, when you have a planet like K2 there, and there's also this like, was it Mars as well? It might be that he has yeah, I think he has Mars and Leo as well. So he's the three fire planets in Leo. He's a pretty intense guy. But Mars is the ruler of his ninth house because his ninth house will be Aries, which is ruled by Mars. So when he has, I think, Mars and or K2 uh, in Purva Phalguni, so that means that his marriage is going to be a spiritual marriage to God, essentially, And you kind of get a little bit of that here because this K2 Venus and Purva Phalguni are aspecting Purva Phalguni and Uttara Phalguni is aspecting the ninth house of religion, spirituality. So it looks like, again, it's the sort of releasing of art or creativity that was more like for enjoyment, adding some purpose to it, and then like surrendering the outcomes of it to some divine higher power, essentially. Yeah. So then the fourth house here, the fourth house lord is Mercury. Sun is there. It's aspected by Moon and Saturn. So this can be like sorting through the past because Mercury was just in Virgo for the last almost, few weeks, just recently, and moved out of there. But you're going to get Mercury back into Virgo when Venus enters there because you're going to get a parivartana exchange between Venus and Mercury. So it's going to be sorting through the past and sorting through the lineage, taking a hold of career and purpose. Like, I think, again, reconceptualizing or maybe shifting the perspective on these things. Not that I don't think that the activities will change so much, but it's more of like, again, like I've been watching for the last, which makes sense also. For the last week, I don't know, somehow I've been getting into watching Japanese minimalist videos, and it's kind of funny because like they talk about how you could, like when you go through decluttering, it could be some people can kind of go at it with like, or even minimalism, like how few things can I live with? Like it's almost a contest to be the most efficient. For some people, maybe it is, okay. But these videos are pointing out that there's a difference in perspective when you're trying to just be like, I'm decluttering things not because I'm trying to like live with only two objects in my life, like the minimum number of objects in my life. The goal of decluttering is to open up space and to also prioritize the things that really support me and who I am and where my life is now and the things that bring me joy now, as opposed to the person I was or the person I aspire to be and that sort of thing. So the perspective and mind shift is very different. And even like, when I was teaching group classes of yoga, um, so I think most of you know I've been like a yoga teacher for 20 something years now. It's like the people who like strive, to really force their bodies to, I don't know, even do things like touch your toes. The yoga really comes from not just touching your toes. I mean, yeah, maybe your body gets more flexible, but what about your mind? Like, what is your mind doing? Like, is your mind yelling at you, like, oh, you have to touch your toes. If you don't touch your toes, you're not doing yoga correctly. I've heard a lot of people say, I'm not good at yoga. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, that in and of itself is not a very kind of yoga minded type of statement. Like, they might think that the purpose of yoga, which is often the case in like the United States, it's like kind of like a sport or physical activity or something. But it's more about like, what are the thoughts coming to you as you're attempting to touch your toes? Like it's like, oh, hi, I'm so glad like I have feet, that function for me. And oh, look, like, I move like 1 millimeter closer today than I was yesterday. You can have all kinds of thoughts. So the yoga is not just the can you touch your toes or not, but it's like what's going on inside of you, in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit as you're moving through these poses. So it's almost like that's what's going on here. Is that it's almost like somebody's been put into pretty strenuous yoga poses that they've had to hold for too long, and they're like, and now, like the grace, the new perspective is coming to shift and then bring the upliftment and enlightenment potentially. Yeah. So yeah, and on this fourth house. So again, there's been some challenges mentally, emotionally, but essentially, especially once Venus moves into Virgo and you get Mercury back too, it's like sorting through like what's the fourth house represents happiness, like what truly is going to bring enjoyment, purpose, happiness to one's life. So yeah. The next slide here, all the stuff on the left is the same. My notes for the other houses on the right are different though. So the fifth house lord is Venus, Mercury, and Mars. They're aspected by Jupiter. So creative advising, artistic expression, education, spiritual transformation of the mind and body, tantra, yantra, mantra, and children even. So this, again, it looks like this is happening for the native as well as potentially children if they have them. Yeah. Then the sixth house lord is Mars. And since Mars has gone 12 houses away, this could be the end of acute troubles. So again, that's another indication that there's going to be some, improvement here to some of the troubles. Because that's the other thing, is that like the summer, a bunch of planets rolled through Gemini, and including Ardra, which is the nakshatra before Punarvasu. Ardra is symbolized by a storm cloud, lightning and thunder and all this kind of stuff, like drama. It can be very dramatic. Like it's sort of a cleansing period, but it can be a lot of drama. And so it was pretty turbulent, very turbulent energy going on for Gemini. So I think that was probably the start of the shift in identity, physically, mentally, emotionally for Geminis. But then this is going to be the, um, again, especially with Jupiter is going to be in Cancer for almost 2 months, and then it's going to retrograde back into Gemini, and then it's going to be there through, I want to say, June of next year, 2026. So Gemini's, especially Gemini rising folks, especially have been really going through like a spiritual transformation upgrade, I would say. Yeah. But it ain't all easy, It's like it can be jarring, and. So, where was I? So, yeah, so, and then this Mars, is also, again, this can be related to initiating new income or groups because Mars is aspecting the 11th house. So the seventh house lord is Jupiter. Jupiter's aspecting there. So Jupiter's been protecting the seventh house of spouse-like partner, partnerships, business partnerships, independent business, path forward in life. It's been protecting, the seventh house from this massive gnarly Saturn. So it will keep protecting potentially in a different way. The way it's going to protect once it goes into Cancer is because this massive Jupiter is going to be shining on Saturn. So it's going to be stabilizing Saturn as Saturn goes through this like transformation energy and that Bhadrapada energy. But looks like again there's like a restructuring of spiritual, or it's even spiritualizing relationships, partners, independent business, and path in life. Then the eighth house here, the Lord is Saturn. It's aspected by an exalted. So Mars is aspecting here, where Mars is exalted. So the eighth house is deep psychology. So again, this is considering, new leadership, new actors here, new actions here. You know, rebelling against the past. This could also bring in some nervousness because Mars, even though it's exalted here, Mars is still in Swati, so you're still going to bring some of that nakshatra energy to the 8th house. So there can be courage here, but some, insecurity as well. I would say kind of a mixed bag. Then the ninth house lord is this retrograde Saturn again, and then Rahu's there in the same nakshatra Purva aspected by Jupiter and Venus. So that's kind of nice because again, you're getting the two natural benefics, easing the shifting and changing, pretty dramatic shifting and changing that's going in the 9th house. It could be like also like a dual ambition here because Rahu's in Purva. One of the symbols of Purva besides the funeral pyre is a two-faced person. So this could be like, trying to do two things, at the same time, especially related to father, especially related to government, authority, religion, enterprise, institutions. Those are all like 9th house things. And, a lot of advising both spiritually and practically. And again, as we're like remodeling here, because especially the Saturn, retrograde Saturn Purva, since it's the lord of the 8th house of deep psychology, there's a deep psychological shift that's going and happening here right now for Gemini risings. And then also it's also, deeply transforming, 9th house issues for them as well. So what else? The 10th house here, 10th house lord is Jupiter, and we have Moon and Saturn there. So difficulties related to mind, emotions, public self, identity. We've been talking about these things. And again, this 10th house energy, especially once Venus shifts into Virgo and Jupiter shifts into Cancer, it's going to be very similar to April 2025. So you might see a reprise of your Pisces house, even if you're not a Gemini rising, whatever your Pisces house was doing back in April, probably get some similar, not exactly the same, but some kind of similar events going on. Because we had Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn all in Pisces at that time. Then, and Pisces is the natural 12th house for the natural zodiac. So this might be, hopefully, because 12th house is related to losses and expenditures, and we have Saturn there, which is kind of what kicked off once Saturn moved into the 12th house. That's when like all these new trade laws around the world, global trade laws, really started shifting and changing very dramatically. And Venus and Jupiter might come in and bring some positive news, hopefully related to those sorts of things. But again, it's just, it's fairly quick here, the 2 weeks, but, it might be still notable. Then the 11th house here, 11th house lord is Mars, aspecting its own. Mercury as well is aspecting. So merging, pioneering, initiating groups, income. Also, again, gambling, taking risks, speaking, teaching, related to self and past lineage, because we're bringing in energy from the 4th house, the 1st house, the 6th house to the 1st house. So this is all about, like, how do we almost, again, create a new, because sometimes that's where the real healing is. Sometimes the outward world doesn't change, but sometimes just if we have a perspective shift, then we can like manage the situation or navigate through the situation, with greater ease and less burden, right? And that's what seems to be going on here. Some new creative, unusual creative, transformative energies related to the mind, and then also actions, yeah. So, and then the 12th house here, 12th house lord is Venus. It's aspected by Mars and Saturn. So again, Mars and Saturn are two physical planets. They relate to property and land. They're the two bhumikarkas, two symbols of land as planets. But Mars, again, they're pretty rickety pieces of land because Mars is in like the Swati energy, new grown grass blowing in the wind, and Saturn's on the funeral pyre. But it's almost like what I'm seeing here, especially with like the chart moving to more of a saraswati energy of like creativity and art and that sort of thing. Mars and Saturn together um, is almost the opposite. Mars and Saturn together is like engineering. And so again, it seems like there's kind of this release of, more of like creative energy coming into the mind and the thoughts and the actions, communication, rather than like a nuts and bolts, let's lay out the most efficient plan. And since Mars and Saturn are aspecting the 12th house, there can actually be losses related to more of a, engineering, manufacturing, trying to control things, be super hyper efficient, read all the charts and the numbers and bang it all out that way. It looks like there's going to be losses related to that as opposed to really being more creative and intuitive. So, yeah. All right. So let's see what else we got. Okay. So in the next few slides, I've got the amshas, also known as the subzodiacs or subdivisional charts. And these are mostly interpreted for timing. So what I have listed at the top of each of these slides is the dasha period. So again, currently for the Purnima, we're running Mercury, Venus, Moon, Saturn, and that's shifting to Mercury, Venus, Mars on November 12th. So those are the planets that I've circled in these charts. Okay. So basically, what we're looking for the first pass for these subcharts is like, are these planets in positive houses or negative chart houses? Because that's the first indication. That's not the whole thing, but that's the first indication of like, are things going to go well during that planetary period or subperiod, or are things not? So on this slide here, we have the three health amshas, the D6 for acute issues, the D8 for chronic issues, and the D27 for strength and resilience. So because I put this up first, because again, it seems like, again, the Gemini rising person or people have recently gone through some pretty strong emotional shifts and changes, struggles, maybe even. And so I would assume, based on that, that probably the health amshas are supporting that indication, and they seem to be. So in the D6, you can see Moon, Mars, and Saturn are not well placed. So it's already like issues here. Mars is debilitated. Saturn, at least, it's exalted. So there'll be some changes, but also, like, again, yeah, troubles as well. There is a Mercury Venus parivartana and Saraswati yoga in this chart. So again, beautifying thoughts, creativity. So again, at least the parivartana that's going on here, Mercury and Venus, since we're running Mercury Venus period on both sides of the dasha change here, should help. So again, if this is a person, it looks like this ability to beautify thoughts and their creativity can help to alleviate some of the other things going on here. There's an exalted Saturn in the third house. This can represent change or endings to structures in the past. And then we have like Moon, Mars, Sun in the sixth house. So the two leadership planets with Moon. So this could be about like rebuilding, rebuilding the mind actually and emotions. And then the debilitated Mars in the 12th house. So loss of erratic actions, a loss of leadership because Mars is the ruler of the ninth house. And also Mars is the ruler of the fourth house. So, a lineage, past action. So again, it looks like, again, there's a deviation from the past, sorting through the past, deviating from the past, and doing things in a new creative way. Then the D8 here, chronic issues. Venus and Moon are not well placed. So again, the emotional planets have difficult emotions, which we have is the same in the main chart. Sun and Saturn parivartana in the second chart here. So structure, traditional leadership. And you can see both of those planets are related to the 12th house. So what you could see here is that, again, that Mars and Saturn engineering with Sun and Mars together, two leadership planets. So again, like a very harsh type of pretty, I would say, rigorous or even harsh type of mechanical path forward. There's going to be, losses and challenges emotionally. Yeah. So, and then Mars, once the Mars subperiod in November 12th rolls around, there's going to be some new starter. to the path forward in life, the work, because it's aspecting the 10th house, and it's also aspecting the lugna here, so identity. So again, there's going to be changes in work and identity going on here, but definitely challenges as well. Then the Bamsha D27 for strength and resilience. So we have a debilitated Mercury with Saturn not well placed. Both of these are in the 8th house related to changes and endings. So this can be like, a really tough time mentally, I would say, with those two planets there. But then when Mars rolls around, Mars and Ketu and Jupiter and Sun are in the 5th house. So Jupiter's swa there and Moon is aspecting there. So this is going to be like a lot of unconventional leadership related to spirituality. And that looks like pull things up a bit. Because, I would say Mars is in a much better position than Saturn. And, Moon is kind of neutral, but, so it looks like there'll be a regaining of strength and resilience once person or people move into their Mars period here, sub-period. And on this slide, we have spirituality and formal worship. Hold on a second here. Okay, so I just had to change something on this slide. So on this side we have spirituality and worship. So the Panchamsha D5 for innate spirituality at the top, and the Vimshamsha D20 for formal worship down below. So you can see, again, based on what I was saying in the main chart, like spirituality is like a big, topic coming up for Gemini rising. So, and you can see this D5 Virgodama Lugna. So that means that it's also a Gemini rising, the same rising sign as the main chart. So that means that this D5 of innate spirituality is important. But what we're seeing here, you can see Mercury and Saturn are not well placed, and Saturn's aspecting its own sign in the 8th house. So this could be, again, like shift in mindset through trouble. And then Mars is in the 7th house. So again, way forward, rebellious actions, path forward. But it's also aspecting the 10th house with K2. Mars and K2 together bring a very explosive energy. So in the 10th house here, this could be like blowing up the daily actions, like completely changing the way you act, during, your usual MO, modus operandi. Then Mars is aspecting Lugna as well. So there's a change, in kind of rebelliousness of body and mind. And then Mars is aspecting and debilitating the 2nd house. So there's going to be like, it kind of looks like the innate spirituality is kind of imploding. So I think whatever, maybe personal, private, spiritual action somebody was taking, it looks like that's winding down or somebody's shifting away from that, releasing that. But then if you compare that to the Vimshamsha D20 below with formal worship, you can see this is a completely different chart. So Mars is not well placed, but it's with a Swa Rahu. So this is going to be change, unusual change in action and expression. There's also a Saraswati yoga here. So again, creativity, education. There's a parivartana between Mercury and Sun. So this is good leadership of ideas, speech, communication, education. So Rahu, Jupiter, Sun, Mercury are all Swa. 4 out of 9 planets are Swa. They're all strong. They're going to give, very strong results. And again, the only one that's Rahu, I guess, is in a negative house, but it's in its house of change. So, and the Saturn's exalted. So 5 out of 9 planets are very strong. I mean, you can see this is a much stronger chart for formal worship. So ambitious leadership, expression, work and activity, lineage. Okay, so the other thing is that because there's a parivartana between Sun and Mercury, and we're looking at the 10th house of daily action and the 9th house of, again, religion. I mentioned before when I see Mercury in its own sign, and especially Virgo, which we will get here through Parivartana, somebody's often very interested in meditation and Buddhism. So I would see between these two charts, there's like a big shift towards more formal traditional worship. Maybe not what one has been accustomed to but like maybe a different one, like kind of like me watching these, videos on, you know, not Buddhist, but Japanese minimalism, which is based in like a lot of it is like Zen Buddhism and Shintoism and stuff like that. So, um, yeah. Okay, on this slide we have the Dashamsha D10 for career and reputation, and then the Ekadamsha D11 for public support and income. So, in the D10, all the grahas are well placed. Now, check this out. Like I mentioned, it looks like there's going to be a big bump in career and reputation in a positive direction for Gemini risings at the end of the month. So, look at this. We have Jupiter Swa in the second house, like it will be at the end of the month. And then we have Venus Swa in the fourth house, which is sort of a derivation of Venus moving into Virgo, where it's in parivartana with Mercury. I mean, so the two counseling planets are the two strongest planets in this D10 career and reputation. So both, you know, spiritual advisement as well as practical advisement. And then the other thing is, it's not only like Venus is Swa, but it's with Moon that's exalted, and they both, Venus and Moon, both have Digbal directional strength. I mean, this is very strong creativity, very strong like aesthetics, um, advisements. All the things we've been talking about. So especially like if this is a person, very strong speaker, very strong advisor, very strong in the arts. Um, and then the other thing is Saturn aspects the Lugna here, which is going to bring strength of ideology. So yeah. So yeah, the D10 is very strong, and all the planets are well placed. So, but yeah. Let's see, the Ekadamsha D11 for public support and income. Mercury, Venus, Moon not well placed. So again, the two mind planets, Mercury, Moon, the two emotional planets, Venus and Moon. So difficulty with mind and emotions. Mars is Swa though in the fifth house, so it's got some strength. So when we start running Mars subperiod, this could be a big bump up, or initiation in public support or income that's necessary or important for the career. With Mars and Scorpio in the fifth house, this is like a deeply transformative counseling leadership type of energy. There is like a Balarishta yoga here. 5 out of 9 planets are in negative houses. So again, there may be, again, for if this was a person, probably a lot of, most of the time, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. And so when this Mars period comes in, it's going to like add to this boost that is happening for this particular chart that's happening with the shift of Jupiter to its exaltation sign of Cancer, and then Venus to its, well, a Swa sign through parivartana with Mercury. So this is again, pretty much all very positive, especially this D10's like pretty off the hook, so very strong. And on this slide, we've got relations. So the Navamsha D9 for spouse and partnership at the at the top, and then Drake and a D3 for siblings. So D9, Venus, Moon, Saturn not well placed. So problems with emotions, Venus and Moon, right? But all these planets are in either the 3 or the 8th house, so 3rd or the 8th house. So that's all about changes and that sort of thing. There will be some support of Venus and Moon because Jupiter's aspecting its own house, because Venus and Moon are in Sagittarius. That's ruled by Jupiter. And then when we run Mars subperiod, what's going to happen? Well, Mars is ruler of the 7th house, and also it's in the 10th house here. So again, so the 10th house is 9 to 5 work, and the 7th house is independent business. So again, it looks like there's some big, how would I say, like shift or change here related to that, which makes sense because again, if you take that main chart and flip it upside down to make it a chart for the spouse, then that Venus in Virgo with Sun, and then getting Mercury back there, that's also going to be a big boost for the spouse of the partner. So, but it does look like, um, again, both the spouse and the native are feeling these emotional effects and challenges that have been going on. Then the Drake in a D3 for siblings. Venus is Swa. Wait. Venus is not Swa. Moon is Swa. And Venus is with a Swa Ketu, though. So Venus and Moon are not well placed. So you see that quite a few times here. So you can see again over and over again emotional challenges. Yeah. But the Swa Ketu with Venus is very much in the third house, very much like the main chart, although this isn't a Gemini rising chart. So again, the sibling of the sibling, because we're looking at the sibling chart here. So the sibling of the sibling brings us back to the native. So you can see that there's some sort of the sibling of the sibling, meaning the native, is involved with some sort of unusual art. And looks like innovative, type of situation here. So, and then Venus aspects its own house in the ninth house, where there's Mercury and Rahu. So that's also fairly similar to the main chart. So again, ambition with spirituality, enterprise, in a very like beautifying thoughts, creative thoughts, that sort of thing. That's also, so it looks like the sibling and the native sort of similar in a way. Yeah, and they're kind of reflecting each other. Then here we have more relationships. So we have the Saptamsha D7 for children, the Dwadashamsa D12 for parents and grandparents. So at the top here, the moon is with, let's see, Moon and Mars are not well placed. Okay. The moon, though, is with an exalted Mars. It's also a Karko Mars, so there might be trouble with siblings that the children have. And children could be not like biological children or even adopted children or stepchildren, but it could be like the younger generation, if you want to think about it that way, depending on what level of, how you're applying this information. But there's going to be a lot of courage here, but especially regarding, how to change and innovate the mind, because we have K2 and Moon and Mars. So there's also a Saraswati yoga here again. So we're passing on creativity and education, and a lot of speech and spirituality, because Jupiter is Swan, the second house. So the children or generations, people coming after you, are coming from a very spiritual family, even if it's not biological. So again, and there's a lot of courage here in transforming the mind. So rather than maybe getting stuck or, with all the emotional challenges, that sort of thing. Then the Dwadashamsha D12 at the bottom here, parents and grandparents. Well, you can see this is really pretty intense here. The moon is not well placed. And you have basically all of the malefics on the moon. I mean, you have Moon with Rahu, and then directly across it, you have Saturn, Mars, and Sun. So Saturn, Mars, and Sun are aspecting the moon. So you have 4 natural malefics on the moon. Okay, this is like the previous generation, so parents, grandparents, or older generations, or whatever, really struggling and really fighting. Okay, you can see the direct contrast between the D7 with the children D12. So in the D12, the second house, instead of a Swa Jupiter, you have a Swa Sun, a Swa Ketu, a Swa Mars, and a debilitated Saturn. Okay. This is like fighting and fighting and fighting, like endless fighting, because you have the 3 fire planets, all Swa, okay, and Saturn, which is debilitated. So this is like, tearing down structures rather than diplomacy. This is pretty intense, and this is very strong fighting here. But again, you're also bringing in some of this, this nakshatra energy, right? So Saturn's in Purva Bhadrapada, funeral pyre. Mars is in Swati, so shaky, fledgling energy. K2 is probably the best one in Purva Phalguni, although there's no purpose, there's enjoyment, but no purpose to it. And then Sun is in Hasta, so taking control. This is all about like, what do they call it? All or nothing type of mentality, like not diplomacy, not talking, no. So it's a very different type of way of even dealing with speaking, especially, but also like the inner circle, like what kind of influence and conversations do you have with your family and inner circle, the people who are like family to you, even if they're not, whatever, married in or biological or whatever. Also, a lot of focus here with this Mars and Saturn and K2, so leadership of like physical, tangible things as opposed to spirituality. That's like influencing, the talk and the actions and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think that might be the end. Let's see. Yes, that's the end. So, anyway, as always, thanks so much for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. Appreciate all your support on the channel. People liking and sharing and subscribing and sending in donations, and all of it's very much appreciated. So, thank you all for that. And again, all of my teaching videos on the subject of my concept playlist, they can be found there. For famous birth charts, check out my birth charts archive list 2025 video for all the famous charts I've analyzed on the channel and the videos you can find them in. If you're interested in individual birth chart reading or an application to my upcoming astrology course in January of 2026, or to be put on a mailing list for future courses, email me at heartlightastro@yahoo.com. And then I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I talk about Ayurveda, so traditional Indian medicine and yoga, so other Vedic arts, as well as other paradigms of medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care, so that's out there too for you. All right, so as always, I hope you found. Sorry, my voice is definitely going. I just took a sip, but it wasn't enough. A sip of water, but it wasn't enough. Anyway, yeah, it's time for me to be quiet and move on, I guess. But in any case, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so until the next one, take care, and I wish you all the best for the Shard Purnima. All right, namaste.